Welcome to the Trino Community Broadcast.
Hello, and welcome back one and all to the Trino Community Broadcast. Joining you as always, my name is Cole Bowden, developer advocate, and also my eternal co-host, Mr. Manfred Moser. How are you doing today, Manfred?
Hi, good. Hanging in there, getting some stuff done for Trino again for a second, so that's good. Having fun.
Yeah, it's the joys of open source is that you may change jobs, you still get to work on open source, the community, and talk about what's been going on with it. So
yeah, I feel like the other aspect is also there's always way more work that you can ever get done.
Yes, it is a mountain of tasks, and at least it means you get to prioritize, right? The most important stuff is what you get to tackle, which is kind of rewarding in a sense. There's no small stuff to work on.
Yeah, and that is doing Trino Community Broadcast. And today we're getting some insights from a Norse god, but more about that later, right?
Yeah, it's Loki, if anyone's curious what Norse god, but we'll describe what that is in
yeah, hopefully it's not too deceptive.
Yeah, the trickster god, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think we can jump into catching everyone up on what's been going on in Trino lately, right, Manfred?
Yeah, that sounds good. Our guest today later on will be Karsten Jeschkies from Loki and Grafana Labs. But before we roll into that, let's talk about our releases. And there are two. We had the timing just right because one actually came out like last night. Actually, I haven't checked if it is live. I could check, I guess. No, it's not live yet. It ran last night. So I can tell you that it's gonna be live shortly, but the release notes already merged. So these are the features, and binaries will be available later on today. Probably Martin is probably cracking ahead on it.
Yeah, that's always been his favorite task, is running all of that.
Yeah, we have a few less releases since I sort of changed over, and Cole also not doing the release notes anymore. There's too much work otherwise to be done. But the releases have gotten bigger, therefore. So we have 475 and 476 coming shortly.
Yeah, less frequent, but more content. The development isn't any slower. It's just the release cadence got a little less regular, which isn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
So 475 added support for the corresponding clause in set operations. That's some pretty powerful SQL that you're not going to find in a lot of places. Support for the auto grouping set that includes all non-aggregated columns in the select clause. So some work with sets here that makes life easier for doing, like, I think with sets
the auto grouping is just easier, right? Like instead of having, like, if you're grouping by a lot of stuff, you don't have to just go get it done, basically.
Yeah, it's the even better than group by all,
Yeah.
It's allow cross-region data retrieval when using the S3 native file system. So if you have data in one S3 bucket and data in another S3 bucket in two different regions, you can go ahead and fetch it from both of them as part of one federated query, which I believe is something most systems in Amazon and AWS don't even let you do.
Yeah, they don't like doing that because it occurs costs for customers, right? But like, you just sometimes in that situation where you have a data lake that has to be geographically separated and just like that, and then what are you gonna do, right? Like, at least Trino doesn't block you from it, but you do want to know what you're doing when you run queries around that.
Yep. Then we have support for all storage classes when using the S3 native file system for writes. So you can write to any storage class into S3.
Yeah, there's some like internal classes and some edge cases that people use those for, and we finally ended all of them. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, so this is now, read from anywhere in S3, write to S3 with no issues whatsoever. Numerous improvements on Iceberg Hive and Delta Lake connectors. That's something you can dig into the release notes more if you want to find out about, but development on those is more active than ever. Trino is really setting itself up to be a premier engine for querying a lakehouse, and that's kind of always been shown in most of these releases.
And then the last one is the removal of the lazy block class. That is an internal thing and shows up only for plugin developers in the SPI, but it was a massive effort and has some pretty cool performance improvements and clean up the code. So props to Dane for doing all that work. It's been pretty crazy. And for those of you, as usual, that want to see more about the changes in those Iceberg Hive and Delta Lake connectors, the release notes are right there at your fingertips, which also applies to 476, by the way, which has even more of those changes. So let's just look at some of them. The big one is probably that we now require Java 24 as a runtime. We already had Java 24 as a runtime shipped in the Docker container for, I want to say, at least 3 releases or so, like a while basically. And it's been no problem and it's good. So now we make it a requirement, which will allow us to update again to some of the newer language and performance features related to the new JDK.
Yeah, support for comparative values of geometry is cool if you're, trying to figure out whether an object is north or west or something like that. I think that's probably where that's going to come in. Skipping through a little bit, add columns to the all manifest metadata table for iceberg tables.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more.
There's like 5 or 6 columns. I didn't want to list them all, but it's one of those metadata tables that has a lot of things that you can inspect. So it's good to.
Yeah, so you'll get more information when you go to look at your manifests, which is actually quite important if you're like a iceberg system administrator and maintaining it. Is seeing everything that's going on is a great way to understand your performance and what kind of compaction you need to do, etc. So Trino giving more insight into that is quite exciting. Support for time travel in Delta Lake is also quite exciting, Manfred.
Yeah, the time travel in Delta Lake, the 4 timestamp as of, it always had time travel for quite a while, but it was a pain because you had to like find out what the snapshot is and then say as of that snapshot. So that's like not as user friendly. Like normally people think in dates and times. And that is something that it did exist in the Iceberg connector, but because the metadata inside is like very different, it took a while to get that going. I know that the team at GitHub will appreciate that because they kind of asked for that feature. So we'll have to let them know.
Yeah, it's a cool thing to have going on where, the syntax is unifying almost, right? It's between the different data lakes. Trino is running the same syntax on all of them, despite them behaving a little differently. So
yeah,
that's the power of a federated query engine.
Couple of little things I need to mention though is there was a regression with the graceful shutdown in Trino 474. So that regression is fixed. So if anyone sits on 474 or 475, you might want to go 476. And then the JVM configuration for the BigQuery and Snowflake creator is about that SunMISC unsafe stuff. We no longer have that as a default configuration. So if you use one of those 2 connectors, then you need to add that to the JVM config of your cluster. This way it's safer for the overall system to run, and that's always a good thing. So pretty cool release, and the binaries should be coming out any minute now.
Yeah, and if you were on 474 or 475, we recommend swapping immediately due to that regression with graceful shutdown. So if you're just keeping Trino running all the time, then I guess you probably don't care. So only if you're starting and stopping it is that a super impactful regression. But
yeah, typically also for scaling. And then what else did we do? We had a few other releases. There's a big Python client release 3.3.4, which had a whole bunch of changes in there. So have a look at the link there. Thank you for all the contributors as well. So this has been a little bit of a bigger one, which is good to have. And then a new Helm chart that upgrades for Trino 475. I'm sure 476 will come shortly as well. And then a little bit of a Helm chart update for the Trino Gateway. We're still working towards Trino Gateway 16. And that's partly my fault. I haven't gotten around to do the release notes, but I will hopefully have time to get going on that soon. But I think our next step is to talk about Loki. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, hello.
Hello. Yeah, hello.
Karsten is joining us all the way from Europe. So he's this nice afternoon sun there in the background. So thank you for joining us and taking the time to talk to us about your work in the software ecosystem. Seems to be pretty extensive. You've been around, I can see, from your sort of resume that you were working on like machine learning at Amazon ages ago, which is pretty amazing. And then you worked on Mesosphere. Unfortunately, that didn't go as everyone was hoping. Like Kubernetes won that.
Yeah. There was a victim of Kubernetes. There was like, if you've been around long enough, you probably know Mesos as a scheduler or container engine. But yeah, that ship sailed, I think, and went to Kubernetes. Yeah.
Killed by Kubernetes, and who knows what Kubernetes is going to get killed by now? Maybe by going back on prem or something, or something simpler. But it's going to be a while. And now you've been doing work on Loki, and you're at Grafana Labs. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, 5 years. It's almost 5 years, man. It's like almost half of my professional career. Yeah, I joined Grafana Labs, and originally I worked in like a little bit on cloud stuff there, but then was working for 2 years on Loki. And for people who do not know, I will show it later in the slides. It's a log aggregation engine or log storage engine, so you can put your logs in and you can query it. And then I moved within the company into our cloud offering, or we call it Act 3, basically making things easier to integrate and pushing more logs and metrics into our databases.
But you're working at Grafana Lab from Germany, so you're also in a distributed company setup.
Oh yeah. Grafana Labs, there was like the initial thing back in 2020. I wanted to work remotely, and when I joined Grafana, suddenly everybody was working remotely, so that was kind of ironic.
And never looked back.
Yeah.
And then you never looked back, so that's good.
Yeah, and I mean, Grafana Labs, since they are a remote first company, they never really had any transition issues.
Awesome.
I should say as well that I'm a pretty big Grafana user in my day-to-day for like engine metrics and logging of how things are going. So I've spent many an hour staring at logs to figure out what's going on in Grafana and looking at graphs of like utilization. So I'm a fan of the product, but it's interesting to see how it behaves in different environments. So
yeah, so Grafana itself, like the dashboarding is like the main known product from Grafana Labs. I was surprised to see there's all these others like Tempo and Mimir and like Loki, obviously now. And then also you seem to be quite involved in the Prometheus and open telemetry sort of thing. So it's quite a big suite of things that Grafana does, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's always hard to, there's Grafana and Grafana Labs, and I don't think they're going to change the name. So because like Grafana obviously is the most popular and biggest software we offer. But yeah, we extended it with Mimir and Loki being storage engine, Tempo for traces. So we have this stack we call LGTM, which is Loki, Grafana, Tempo, Mimir. So if you want like an observability stack, we had profiles now as well. And some people claim, I think it's a bold claim, that Grafana Labs is by now the biggest independent open source contributor since Red Hat was bought by IBM. But obviously it always depends on, what are you counting? Are you counting people or, commits?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like open source is definitely embedded in our company, which is one of the reasons I'm working here.
That's awesome. Well, we love open source. Obviously, Trino is also in
there are a lot of parallels, like you will see, like for people who do not know Grafana, you will see that there's like some, I think, philosophical parallels between the softwares.
Well, do we want to pull up your presentation on Loki and then dive into what that is?
Yeah, sure. So this is a really quick rundown. I mean, we talked about my career. That doesn't really matter that much. One big disclaimer, I'm here as an OSS contributor. So this is basically my 20% project. It's nothing official or supported. But as I said before, Grafana Labs loves open source software, is a big contributor. And, as it always goes, if this catches on, then maybe I get more time to, be more responsive to issues.
All right, let's make it catch on then.
Yeah. Big rundown again, so we have this big thing we call Big Ten philosophy. So Grafana, the software, but also many of our products do interact with other services, even if they might be competitors. Like you see Elasticsearch, some people use Elasticsearch to aggregate their logs and search them. That's fine for us. Like we love it because it's a big ecosystem. We talked about the LGTM stack, so Loki, Grafana, Tempo, Mimir. And then we have the cloud, like most open source companies, we have now a hosted version, and we extend it with software that make it easier to use, easier to extend. So I personally am working on systems to import metrics from the cloud. We have this little guy is Alloy, the logo of Alloy, our aggregator. Then we have instance and response management. So, if you're on call and want everything in one place, your alerts, your monitoring, your lovely on-call app that's going to wake you 4 a.m. in the morning. And so that it doesn't work, gets there, we have testing and, much, much more.
Cool. I have to ask a completely off-topic question.
Yes.
But obviously LGTM stands for looks good to me. was the name of the products there first? Like obviously the G from Grafana was there first.
It emerged accidentally. So the nice story I heard, Tom Wilkie, who's our CTO and who's the original author of Loki, wanted to call Loki Tempo and Tempo Loki. And I think it was some go-to-market person was saying, wait a second, so the logging aggregate engine is called Tempo with a T, and the traces one is called Loki with an L. That doesn't make any sense. And so they switched it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of by accident. I think the M we could control because it was Cortex first, but then we forked it. But yeah, it's actually the P for profiling also does work, because then it looks pretty good to me, if you want to know.
Yeah, that's funny. It's cool.
Yeah, naming. Loki. So that's like not a sentence from me. That's kind of marketing. It's like Loki is a horizontal, scalable, highly available multi-tenant log aggregation system inspired by Prometheus, or like how Tom Wilkie coined it was Prometheus, but for logs. So what this actually means?
Let's take that apart. Like, I mean, that sounds a bit like Trino, honestly. Like
horizontally scalable. We're adding servers to it. Highly available. It runs all around the clock. Multi-tenant. Many people could use it at the same time. Log aggregation. It's compiling.
Exactly. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is pretty much, except maybe for the the storage bits, right? Like Trino, you connect to other storage engines, and Loki has its own tailored for logs. And the important thing that the original designers did is that Loki is very, very light on the schema. So that's the inspiration from Prometheus. So you identify logs only by a label set, and that's it. So you don't need to, like in Elasticsearch, index everything before and then say like, oh, my logs are always JSON formatted or logfmt or whatever. Loki doesn't care. Like, you just throw it at it and it really eats it up, and at a really high scale. I mean, we have users sending us terabytes. It can query petabytes by now if you really wanted to. And then, so the idea was, if you have observability logs, you're going into your system, you're often not really interested in querying it until you have an alert, right? And so why should we waste resources on indexing things when you never query it? But then at query time, we use all these resources to make the querying fast. I mean, things are changing now a little bit, like we'll see. Like, that original stance doesn't always stay true anymore. So we need to index a little bit more. And then what really brought me, what convinced me of Loki, if you see it, is it's really tailored for developers and operators. So I was used to downloading log files and then, do my bash scripting, my piping. And LogQL, the query engine for Loki, looks really similar. So it's like, as a developer, as an operator, you're like, oh, I want that. Like, I don't care for other things until you hit this certain barrier where, you're like, oh, maybe SQL wouldn't be so bad. And that's kind of where, how I got into Trino and building this thing.
Yeah, so it's for the more complex analysis. Let's just a question, like when it says tailored for logs. Logs are essentially always some sort of time series. So how is that different in terms of if when people talk about a time series database, is that kind of the same thing, but the storage is different, or how does that compare? What is the storage even about? Like in your case, where are other logs stored in Loki, or what's Loki doing there?
So yeah, that's a very good question. So there are two things to this, right? One is that most of our databases are using a bucket storage like S3 now for the storage. So this kind of like the pattern that I think evolved like a few years ago. I think Snowflake was one of the bigger ones, if I remember correctly, where you really separate your compute from your storage. So you don't have to worry about your disks anymore, like from the PostgreSQL, MySQL world, where you write everything to disk, and then you have to have stateful services. So most things in Loki are actually stateless, which is pretty nice. So you can scale it up like crazy. The log part is actually like, if you look in the code, you find remnants of Prometheus and Mimia, the time series for when you have numeric values. But it got more specialized logs are really interesting, and there's interestingly little in the OLAP database world which is tailored for logs, because one is the parsing, like the different ways how you want to parse your logs and get information out of your logs. And the other for storage is when you store strings, like most literature and most systems are usually thinking about city name or names, like fairly short strings. But some logs are really long, and some logs are even, multiple lines and so on. So how do you compress that? How do you query this? How do you extract information from that? That's where Loki really shines, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. So the payload in an individual log entry is kind of like random, right? Like I know in Trino, for example, sometimes like you have log entries that have a whole stack trace in it, and then like a simple line, and then you can even have the log JSON formatted payload in it and stuff like that. So like Loki can deal with all that.
Yeah. You can. So we have a JSON parser and a logfmt parser, for example, right? And then you get it basically spreads it out. So you have your predefined labels for identifying where your logs came from, mostly, like your pod label or something similar. And then you might have information inside, like, your Nginx logs, right? Access logs. And then you can parse it and can extract your HTTP requests data and pass it out, basically, without really crafting a complicated parser. Or if you used, I think, Logstash before, like you don't have to do that much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So you mentioned S3 storage. So is it any object storage? So if someone wants to run this on Google Cloud, can they pump it into Google Cloud Storage or Azure or something? Or like even on-prem on like MinIO or whatever?
So officially it's Google, Azure, and Amazon, because like that's how we do it for our cloud offering. It works better with some services and others it doesn't so well, and that's that depends on
yeah,
how
we
much
have
love
the same experience with Trino.
One cloud vendor who's like known not to be so well, but you can run it with MinIO. I mean, that's how I run it locally right now, actually. You can run it with MinIO, but we're always careful not to say like we support that, if that makes sense, right? Like, it's always a thing. If I totally would do it if it's an OSS project or was starting out, but if you really want to get into enterprise and support from us, I think that would be a different question.
Well, you're talking as a developer anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, for me as a developer, I'm like, yeah, sure, like,
So just before we jump, so you mentioned open source. So is Loki open source? And I, as a developer, can just fire it up and play with it?
Yeah, definitely. So we have, we gave, luckily, like last or 2 years ago, we gave the Helm Chart a little bit more love. So you can have started off as a single thing. I mean, that's always nice about, Grafana, Mimia as well. Loki, you can just start a single binary and that's it. And then you go from there, right? You can enable multi-tenancy. You can enable the storage into S3. So if you don't do it, it just writes it into a folder. And then the next step is to have what we call simplest scalable deployment, so where you separate query and ingestion. And then if you really want to go crazy and have this insane scale, but I think that must be like terabytes an hour, then you can even split it up further. And then you get to the even bigger scale, which, I mean, if you have this, you're probably already a customer of ours.
Yeah. So it's pretty common to run that as on your SaaS deployments and have whatever web applications people are running pump the logs in.
Yeah, it's really common that people run it. I mean, obviously, like Kubernetes, like is I think the major thing to run it. Some people run it on their Raspberry Pis as well, so that's kind of nice, right? Like you go from your Raspberry Pi to your insane distributed deployment in Kubernetes, and then
Yeah, never underestimate a Raspberry Pi. They're pretty powerful these days.
No, it is. Yeah, I mean that's a way to just get started. It's always funny when people talk about scale, right? Like, I mean, the biggest I've seen was back in the Amazon days. People talk to us, and then they talked about terabytes by second, right? But then you talk to people from CERN, from the physics people with their height, and they talk about petabytes by second, right? Like, so you always can, up it. So yeah, just start with your Raspberry Pi if you want to make experiments. It's totally fine.
Yeah, just don't have a linear accelerator or a circular accelerator. Pump the data into the Pi. Awesome. So now you made a connector.
Yes, yeah, I did. So it's really interesting. So the story is father goes a little bit back. So because we saw that, like, and it's right when I started, that people start using Loki for more than, quote, just observability, right? Like they do to analyze the business. That's actually what I did. It's like I wanted to know, like, how do people send their data, and then you get the user age, and then where should I put it? Oh, I just put it in the logs, and then I can run stats on it. Or for security, that's SIEM or CM if you wanted to do that. But Loki is limited, and that's not a downside, right? It's like this, for me, always this Unix philosophy. Like Loki is good at doing certain things, and the team has been kind of hesitant to extend it too much, if that makes sense, right? So there's one case which actually did make sense, which is like the needle in the haystack thing, where you look for specific few log lines in your petabytes of logs. So that's, they started to support pretty well, but now it's always a question about joining. Like, do you want to support joins or not? And I think, like, making Loki open and connected to an OLAP system like Trino actually totally makes sense, right? To bridge this gap from observability to data analytics. So you can query your logs from Trino, you can join a metadata like I will show, you aggregate multiple statistics in one query. So that's a tricky one, which I need to explain. And then the last big one, right, where you extract your logs, transform them, your good old ETL process. Which we have internally, but we don't really, advertise it as such. So that's where I think a connector totally makes sense, in my opinion. And it did just click with Loki. Like, I tried Spark before, I tried Kafka before, but that didn't really, made sense to me in the end. So, but with Trino, was immediately there, just to make some, advertisement for you.
Yeah, no, we do have a catalog of connectors. Seems to be always wanting to grow, and we don't have enough reviewers to review them all. But yours made it in, so that's really exciting. So
yeah, I'm really thankful. I do not know their who it was in the end. Unfortunately, I should have looked this up. But like, I begged a little bit on the channels, and then sometime, I think it was in January, February, I finally got the reviews. It was really thorough.
Yeah, I think it was probably Yuya was probably involved. He's doing a lot of that. So
yeah, and I mean that was amazing to have it now, on the main line, and then we can start building out. I have a slide later, so for contributions are always welcome, of course, because the connector is like in a very early stage right now. Cool. Oh yeah, that's just said, like, Loki is, like, the architecture is making big changes right now. So they started, and this is public, they started building on WarpStream, which is kind of a storage bucket-based Kafka implementation for the ingest path, which is kind of funny, right? Like, everything always at a certain scale goes to Kafka. It's just really interesting. And they have something called variance, which is not like allows you to pull multiple statistics in one query, but it's kind of tricky how this will be exposed, and then there's more to come.
Okay, that yields an interesting question on mine. So Loki itself, is it written in Java then?
Oh, it's written in Go.
In Go, okay.
Yeah.
Because Kafka is Java, right?
Yeah.
But WarpStream, I don't know.
WarpStream might be. I need to look it up. It's either Go or Rust, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. So WarpStream supports the Kafka protocol, and
okay, so it's the protocol. Okay, fair.
Yeah, that will be demo time now, unless you have a few more questions. Otherwise,
you probably have more questions to do with them.
The little wouldn't be a demo without a little jazz to spice it up,
Yeah, and I'm kind of scared because it's running locally on my like in a Docker Compose. So for people who don't know this is the software Grafana. the major bit about Grafana is basically that you can build dashboards, you can query what we call data sources. So that's kind of like the parallel to Trino connectors, which kind of, clicked for me that we have a similar thing. And there's a whole world about, we have alerting, hundreds of plugins now. We have the cloud stuff, but I'll keep it simple. So I built a little dashboard for my Trino Loki demo. So I have Docker Compose running in the background with Trino, Loki, Grafana, obviously, a simple web service that I ask an AI to write for Rails. It completely failed. It's overly complex, but it's actually just a to-do app. And I have our testing service K6 running, which makes or used to make requests against my web service. And so these are the logs basically collected by Loki. So this is like how a Loki query would look like. I need to go farther back in time, I think. Yeah. So this basically, I'm selecting my streams, my logout streams. So that's my web service and my Trino, and then I can.
So is that Loki query language or whatever it's called?
Yeah, that is that's LogQL. Yeah. So you most of the time pipe things after another, like you kind of used in Unix with some special characters like this. So here I just searched that I want only the log lines that have a user ID, and I want to pass it as logfmt. And so it did. So this is the message my web service is emitting.
And that language is completely special. Like it's like a special markup for Loki, basically.
Yeah, it's Loki specific. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Which makes it a little bit difficult if you want to interact with it with everything other than JavaScript or Go. So, which made it a little bit difficult for me to analyze it basically before you send off a query. Yeah, and then when you pass it, you get new labels out. So labels are you can think of it as columns. That's kind of, I do not map it like that, or it's a hash map for identifying a log line. I probably should map it out into columns eventually. But yeah, and then you see like a message is listing, and then the user is 9. The source is standard out. You get all these things back. Then I have my Postgre database also running for my web service with users. So this is using Trino. So there's a Trino data source for Grafana, which is pretty nice. So that's not working because it needs to be a table. So I have I have 10 users that I made up. And they have an email address and an ID, which is, of course, the ID that's being logged. And I can run stats as well. So that's then where Loki becomes really interesting, is when you can say like, okay, count my log lines over time and sum them by the user ID. I need to go back in time again. And then it counts basically how many requests each user received. And here's the first issue though, right? Like it logs the user ID. So sure, that's fine, but who's user 3? Right, we have this internally, actually. We have tenants and we log them, and the big customers, like, oh yeah, that's customer 42, but it's like and then I must that, yeah. Sometimes like after being on call long enough, like certain customer IDs, but that obviously doesn't scale. And this is where I think Trino plus Loki become really nice. So I did the same query I will show you in a bit, and I joined with my Postgre database, and so suddenly I get my usernames out, right? So that's this little query. So Loki is exposed as a table function, and so you pass the logql query to the table function, and then we have some markup, and then we can join on the Postgre database, and then with the Postgre database with the user ID, which we extracted from the log lines.
So that's like that's now that typical Trino table function functionality where you basically write a SQL query, and then you have this like function that goes whatever string, send this to the underlying data source and do whatever the system does. And in your case, this is the Loki query language that gets passed through. So when
exactly.
Query, you have to kind of know both languages, but you can wield the power of both, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, you have to know both. I mean, the nice thing is that Trino does support predicate push down, right, and limit push down. So I haven't tackled that yet, but ideally I would start doing that eventually, so that when you say, my log line, my value should contain the username, that I would edit the logql query in the background that's sent off to Loki. And so you don't have to do it. So you don't have to, add this bit, for example, or maybe even a grouping.
Oh yeah,
If that makes
I
sense.
know what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a performance optimization and a user comfort improvement.
Yeah.
But
that's
this is already very
performance.
nice.
Yeah, it is, right? Like, and so you got the, the usernames out. Let me go back. So that's already a big thing. Like when I show this internally, people already wanted to have this. But then the next one.
I'd like to say that this is like, if you aren't a Grafana user in general, like it's like, okay, they've labeled it, but that's like a huge improvement for usability and readability of any kind of log data. And I mean, this is a very basic example. Like my mind is racing thinking of ways that you could use this to get better insights into how things are running based on supplementing the logs with this external data. Like there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing. Like if you know Grafana, and we already have a SQL expression, so you can have two data sources in Grafana and make the join in Grafana. Yeah, it's like, trugging. But then if you run this on, a petabyte, well, we don't always have to go to petabytes, but let's say a terabyte of data, right? Like suddenly, like, you cannot do this in your browser anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's statistics is here. I have to go back again 1 hour. So, with Loki, you can extract metrics as well, and you can actually, have recording rules, and so you write them into our metric database, Mimia again. But one limitation is you can do only one at a time. So you have to have 3 queries. And so Loki does some caching in the background, but essentially it's still running this query 3 times in the background, which is, obviously wasted resources. Like they're working on something, so, you can extract more, but it's not available yet. And I think that's a nice thing with Trino. You can do this, and I think it's actually I like SQL a little bit better here, but I'm going back in time again. So you can have your min, max, average, even some things that Loki doesn't really have. So you can aggregate your statistics in one go, and you only issue one query to Loki and get it back. And you can even do more complex ones, right? Like you can have rolling windows, all the nice functions that Trino expose that Loki and LockQL don't have. And maybe
I think that's where you get towards that kind of like use it for business insight as opposed to just observability, is like with the more powerful aggregations of a full SQL engine, there's a lot more you can look at if you're trying to understand like how are we doing this week compared to last week, or like what's the standard on Tuesdays. Like these things start to become pretty.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like other stuff like business analysts think about that, I as a developer never thought about, is it a holiday, or, even more statistics like distributions and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
And then like this unlocks basically all the analytics with all the Trino data sources, like even like Elasticsearch or Oracle, Postgres, obviously, but also Iceberg, Delta Lake, those kind of things. So like your query can look at whatever data, and it can be like, this one is pretty heavy on the log part, but it can be a query that is very heavy on all the other analytics and just pulls something in from the log for reference, right? So it's like you have complete control of what you want to achieve there. So it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have sometimes customers who look like for specific user events. So they have all the stuff around it, but then they want, these pull out these specific user events from the log lines they have, and that's exactly like you. And then the nice thing is, and this is, I think, then the next step where I don't have a demo, is that you can then load this result into a database, right? Because Trino can write as well, and Loki doesn't. Right? Like we have recording rules, so we get metrics into Mimia, but that's it. So it's really interesting. Internally, we use we have our OLAP system as BigQuery, just historically, and it's really funny when I talk to our BI people, because like they jump through a few hoops to get like metrics derived from logs into BigQuery, and the pipeline continuously breaks. And then I mentioned Trino to them, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, I used Trino at my last job." They kind of want to have it, but it's now this, chicken and egg thing. It's like who sets it up, and then I think once we get it going, it will be like our cluster will grow. But the data is right now in Piku, which is also nice because then the transition is easier.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you wrote this as a 20% project, you were saying earlier?
Yeah, we have in Grafana, we have this nice thing. We have hackathons, but in a nice way, I would say. Like, we get a 1 week blocked off work hours.
Mhm.
So we have the hackathon in a week during our work hours. We have it 3 or 4 times a year. And so that started, the connector started as a hackathon. And then, after that, I kind of continued it as my on and off as my 20% project. Unfortunately, a little bit less than 20%. It was now, yeah. So, but now it's out. Now, I hope we get it soon out internally as well for the first trial and error. So we should see more patches coming up. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I was just going to ask you that. What's up for the future?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, it's working. As you can see, it's a little bit limited. So the really big thing I wanted to do is the split and sharding. So the problem is really not that Loki has internal sharding, like it splits up the query internally and processes it really fast. So that is not the problem. And Trino is fast as well. That is not the problem. The thing is that you want to parallelize I/O, right? Like depending on the data you get back, imagine you query a month's data. You don't want to download it all to one machine. So I definitely would like to have splitting. And as I mentioned before, the problem is you cannot split all queries naively. You really need to look at the query itself, what it does, and then also be a little bit smart about the volume each would process. And so I just talked to members of the team, and we decided to add a endpoint to Loki where we can say, hey, here's my query. Now give me back the sub queries I should have. So here's one query, and now split it into 10 or 100 bits. And then these get distributed among Trino workers. So that's the really big thing that needs to happen next. Then support for Parquet. It's kind of unfortunate right now. It's row-based, the connector, but everything else in Trino, as I understand, is columnar-based by now. And I saw that some connectors are really well, make it easier to work with if the response is in Parquet. And I added a Parquet response format to Loki. So now we can add this to the client as well, so that Trino can just work on the columnar data authentication, obviously, but then the major bit is really pushed down and predicates to speed it up even further. So these are the big 3 items.
Those are some big plans. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, the sharding would be definitely a bigger one. That's, I think, is a must, right? The Parquet responses will be interesting to see, how big it is. But yeah, I definitely like to, continue working on it.
I have a maybe still a question now. How does the connector even work? like we have a lot of connectors that go via JDBC driver, and then we have the connectors like the Iceberg connector or Delta Lake connector that have no run. So basically, the JDBC driver talks to some other database. The Iceberg and Delta Lake connectors, they just talk to files and they need a meta store. It feels like Loki is kind of in between, or it does not use JDBC though, right? Like some other.
No, it does not. I mean, that would have been also interesting, right? Like to build a SQL front end for Loki. It probably would have been maybe the other way, like a new way to do it.
Yeah, it feels like a crazy way, but
yeah. No, so what it does basically, it's internally, it's it describes a table format that's always the same. It's always you have timestamps, labels, which is a hash map, and a value, which can be either a double or a string, and then it sends the query to Loki through our HTTP API. So Loki does have a REST API where you can send it a query, and then the responses translated into what Trino really needs to make processing work.
And when you talk about sharding, then that makes sense to me, because essentially the different Trino workers could all file those HTTP requests independently to potentially even different, whatever they're called in the Loki cluster, different like separate nodes in the Loki cluster as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it will be to the front end, which then does it to
Which
the
then
other
redirects, but yeah.
queries. Yeah, redirects it to the call it queries and the query scheduler. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of like how the OpenSearch and Elasticsearch connectors also do some parallelization. So it's kind of similar in that way. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Karsten. That's super cool and interesting, and like definitely a interesting combination of like the native query language and the focus on like a narrow, like you're saying, the Unix philosophy, but then getting the power of bigger system by combining them. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so where should people go if they want to learn more or try it for themselves?
So if they that's a very good question. So luckily it's part of Trino now. I don't know which release it was actually. I think 74 or 3, maybe 2. So it's in Trino, so you can try it out right now. I suggest you use the Trino documentation on it. If you have issues, you should ping me on the community Slack. I think that would be the biggest one, easiest one. And if I'm not mistaken, I need to look it up myself, like which handle I have.
Do you have like that example that you built up? Is that something that you could potentially share?
Oh yeah. I have. Maybe we should just expose it here. So it's on my private repo. So I got the
magic from Cole. He's giving us names.
Yep. So it's all in here. I mean, like I really need to get rid of Rails and use something much simpler. But if you want to try it out, there's a configuration. Also, like how you connect the data source like Grafana to Trino. That's independently of my work. Really, really interesting.
Awesome. Well, we will be adding all the links to that material to the show notes, and then people can play around. So that's going to be convenient and easy.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you very much for joining us, Karsten. I think Manfred and I have a couple more notes to wrap up on, but excited to see this in Trino. I'm probably going to get my hands on it in my actual day job pretty soon. So
please do, and then don't yell at me if something's broken. Just
I mean, everything's always broken a little bit everywhere. So
it is, yeah.
Yelling when things don't work exactly as expected isn't going to get you very far.
Yeah, and also in open source, you can then go ahead and
just go fix it yourself, right?
Please do. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for this amazing title. I'm gonna steal it definitely. I haven't seen it within Grafana, which is kind of funny.
All right, cool. All right. See you guys later. Wow, that's cool, huh?
Yeah, that is cool. I like when like the whole idea of like, hey, like we could implement this, but it's not really what we're supposed to be doing, and something else solves this problem already. So let's just connect to it.
Yeah, it's admirable when people have that focus, and like the more common one is like, oh, let's do that, shiny over here, shiny over there, and then it's like everything sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this to a lot of people, even since moving in between roles, is like, oh, you need to federate 9,000 different data sources? Like, just use Trino. Like,
exactly.
It does more federation than anything else with different databases and data sources, and it's really quite good at that. So,
yeah.
In any case, Manfred, we'll pull up your screen.
Yeah. We will add more resources to the show notes that come out later. I want to say early next week, latest probably. So we'll get the material from Karsten and everything, and then we unfortunately, that was mostly my fault. The Trino contributor call was skipped in May. I totally forgot it was happening. But I will figure out a day in June when that'll work, and then I'll announce that. So we do want to do Trino contributor calls still going forward. There's lots to talk about. And we constantly have like more releases coming out. And then the 2 upcoming Trino community broadcasts that we have in our plans is we'll talk about visualizing with Loki Symphony and the ODBC driver that they provide, former Simba kind of driver.
Yeah, and Logi and Loki, not to be confused, that is a different thing.
Yep, exactly. I think that's going to be in early July. Still have to narrow down the details again for sure. Also with you, Cole. And then the team from the AWS Proxy project is going to join us to talk about that. So that's Jordan, Pablo, and Christian going to tell us about the AWS Proxy project that is in the Trino organization and is also a interesting little side project. And hopefully we'll also get some more news. The Trino Query UI is coming along and the preview UI is moving along. We'll get another Trino Gateway release out, as I'm sure. So continues to be exciting times in Trino.
Yeah, and that's the joy of open source is things keep rolling. Once you got enough momentum, there's enough people building on it that there's always something new to talk about. So
yeah, that said, we do want you all to help us out as well. There's always need for more reviewers, more contributors, and just people jumping in the Slack channel and helping each other out.
Yeah, if anyone wants to take a crack at release management and compiling release notes, I think there's a relatively high need for that in the community, and a volunteer would be much appreciated. And Manfred and I would be happy to guide you through how to do that.
Yep, exactly. All right, cool.
I think that's it from us. I should say thank you to Firebolt for sponsoring this episode. It's my, they pay for our infrastructure to stream, so they're the unofficial sponsor. But to the Trino community as well, to Karsten for being on, and Manfred, to you as well for joining me for yet another episode.
Yep, it's been fun.
Yep, thank you all for watching, whether live or most of you on video. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye.